excited to get the session started in a couple minutes. So we've got a few minutes till 11:45, and at that time, Chris will join us. But until then, I'd love to chat with everyone. Let me know where you're tuning in from, and maybe send over, I don't know, I'd love to see your favorite emoji. My favorite emoji is the little smiley face with the hands. I think it means hugging, but I'm not quite sure. But yeah, let's chat in the chat. Ooh, Chelsea with the smiley and hearts. I love it. Megan, Vancouver Island. For those of you who don't know where Vancouver Island is, it's an island just off of British Columbia and west coast of Canada. Megan, what's your favorite emoji? No favorite, too many to choose from. Okay, well. Hopin only gives you 6 to choose from. Very fair. That's very fair. Okay, cool. Well, instead of emojis, what have people learned from the sessions today? Anything interesting? Any big takeaways from the sessions? I like the one with the cowboy hat. Giddy up. That's funny. Okay, looks like people are slowly trickling in. Feeding the lions. Yep, that's awesome. Lincoln stink theory. And just a reminder for those who are just joining in, they just wrote this in the chat, but ensure you're running your session on Chrome and have closed out any VPNs for best experience of this session. If audio does arrive, close out your browser and refresh, and it should be able to work. Just a couple more minutes till we get started. What is something that I have learned today? I unfortunately haven't been able to join any events today. I've been on calls with clients. This is going to be my first event of the day. So, Mackenzie, I'm going to be eager to get all the videos so that I can join in. I heard Jason's speech at the beginning for 15 minutes, but then I've been in back-to-backs ever since. So just the life of a salesperson, hoping to get to more sessions tomorrow. Megan said she loves Stefan's use of soccer as an analogy for building a great competitive program. That's awesome. My mind's being blown from Washington, D.C. It's awesome. Mackenzie, are you, for those joiners who are listening in, are we able to provide when the videos will be released or how we'll be releasing the recordings? Okay. Well, we're almost at the top, or I guess not top of the hour, but the third, fourth of the hour. Has anyone ever said that before? We're almost at 11:45 Pacific. So for those of you who are just joining, I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Erin. I'm one of our enterprise account executives here at Klue. I've been working at Klue for nearly 3 years now, and I'm super excited for this summit. It's awesome to see the community get together and take the time to learn about what people are doing in the industry when it comes to competitive. So over the past year, I've had the privilege to get to know a lot of different people in the community, including Chris Agnoli. So I'm super excited for him to join this session and to bring him in just a minute. And I can tell you, we are all in for a treat with Chris. Chris is awesome. And so whether you're trying to scale or tweak an existing CI program, or just starting to create one, or have no idea what you're doing, or where to begin, Chris has been incredible because he has a great amount of wisdom to share, and I feel honored to have the chance to moderate today's session. Before we let Chris join, just wanted a few housekeeping pieces for the session to run you through. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the Summit button, My Agenda, and Speaker Session at the top. Make sure you click on Speaker Session. That's where all the action for this session will be taking place over the next 45 minutes. And the chat tab is where we'll be able to keep banter, and you can throw up anything that you like to say hello. And I was saying earlier, put your favorite emoji if you like, or even just put where you're coming from. I'm located in Grand Bend, Ontario, which most of you have never heard of. It's about, let's say, 3 hours west of Toronto and kind of close to the border near Michigan. So I'm just there today at my parents' place. But yeah, so just to kind of moving forward, this session's all about you. So participate in the chat, ask questions, answer the poll questions. And following Chris's presentation, we will have a lot of time for Q&A. So use the Q&A section to write out your questions, and you can submit them through the presentation, and then we'll be answering them afterwards. And then you'll also be able to join the screen. So if you want to join the screen and that's something you're interested in, just let me know when you're submitting the question. It'd be awesome to meet you and join you on stage. So now let's get to the real reason we're all here. It's my pleasure to introduce Chris Agnoli, Competitive Enablement Lead from Juniper. So just bringing in Chris.
Thanks a lot, Erin. I appreciate it.
Hey. Awesome.
We got it.
Awesome. We did it. But yes, so let's get started. Just to give a bit of background of Chris. Chris spent 16 years in channel selling, implementing and troubleshooting technology solutions for customers around the globe. Chris has led the technical training at Cisco for a period of time. He drove the global channel enablement strategy at Aruba Networks, and now he serves at Juniper Networks as the Competitive Enablement Lead. One of the first titles in the industry I've seen is Competitive Enablement, which is awesome. But yeah, nearly half of his professional life has been focused on honing skills of sales teams he's supported. So I'm so excited for you to share your wisdom and knowledge with everyone, Chris. So I'll let you take it away, and then I'll just jump right in afterwards. So take it away.
Perfect. Let me just get my screen shared. If this old collaboration guy can remember how to do that. So again, thanks, Erin, for the introduction. My name is Chris Agnoli. I am Juniper's Competitive Enablement Lead. That little QR code that you see will get you to my LinkedIn profile. If you have any questions regarding this conversation that I'm unable to answer as we get done today, or feel free to just connect with me, that's fine too. This session, it does have a catchy title, like all seminar sessions, kind of building an enterprise competitive program. But having said that, it's reasonable to assume that in the next 45 minutes or so, we're not going to be building a competitive program. We don't have enough time allotted to get that done. What we will do is cover the important areas that I think you need to consider as you begin to create a competitive program or tune one that you're currently managing. Let's start with my title, Competitive Enablement Lead. As Erin mentioned, not many people have that title. But if you're going to be effective building a competitive enablement program at an enterprise organization, there's a few synergies or partnerships that you really can't live without. And one of those is the revenue or sales enablement teams. I'm a member of the revenue enablement team at Juniper. As a member of that team, I already have a seat at the table to advocate for a slice of every seller's time. As new sales trainings are developed, I'm made aware of those efforts, and I can lobby for the appropriate amount of competitive insight to be integrated into that existing effort. If there's one thing you take away from this session today, besides what I'm going to focus on in a couple of slides here, slide number 4 is pretty important. Remember that building a competitive enablement program is not about creating battle cards. It's about sufficiently equipping your teams to beat the competition. And that equipment that can be delivered several ways, and not the least of which is incorporating your efforts into existing sales training that happens, and then reinforcing what it is you're doing with the different competitive assets that you're going to build. Another partnership that you really can't live without is that with the product teams. And because I work in the enablement organization, the product teams, the marketing teams, they already come to my organization, to my team, the Hang Black's revenue enablement team, with the hopes that we'll teach everyone what there is to know about their products. So it's very easy to quickly and easily leverage that existing cooperation to sell to the product teams. Let's extend that relationship to include competitive, so it becomes a complete package, if you will. All right. The agenda, as we build this out today, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to start by understanding what foundation we have to build from. We're going to talk about assessing your organization's enablement capabilities. We're going to dive into building content with purpose, which is probably the bulk of the presentation today. And we'll spend a little bit of time on measuring your program's success. So again, this is a shorter session. We will touch on several key areas, but Adam and the team at Klue is actively working on scheduling me for a podcast to go a bit deeper in this subject and several others sometime later this year. I know one key interest is selling the investment to your organization for competitive tools, and that's something that Adam's working on building a podcast for me to participate in before the end of this calendar year. So what's the framework to success? In order to build anything, you first got to have a plan, and you're going to need to outline the objectives and the goals for the program, just like you would any other program. First, you'll need to develop a strategy. You'll need to secure investment to execute on that strategy. In order to fully develop the strategy, you have to understand and examine the problems that you hope to solve. You'll need to outline stakeholders, determine how you'll execute on that strategy, and then what and how you'll measure the program's success. While it's imperative that you have a strategy, it's equally important that your organization can develop and distribute competitive assets and intelligence. Ideally, again, you'll want to be integrating into existing processes or efforts. And ultimately, ensuring that you've got the resources and technical platforms in place will really help you measure your success. Without a technical platform, without various tools to house all of this information, you'll never successfully have the metrics that you need to justify what it is you're trying to accomplish to your senior leadership. I think there's one key thing you're going to hear from me throughout this presentation. Sales trust is one of the biggest areas of concern you're going to need to manage as you build your competitive program. If the sales team does not trust what you're delivering, they will not use it. Your sales force can often be a strong source for competitive insights, and they serve on the front line. They're regularly hearing firsthand from our customers what the competition is saying. Acting on those interactions is going to continue to drive the accuracy of your program and build the trust of those teams. Failure to act on those insights will erode trust in the program. It's critical that you focus a percentage of your time on delivery and on consumption. How does consumption play into sales trust? Well, sellers are busy people. And if you don't have time to take 6 hours worth of training, you certainly don't have time for consuming content that isn't helping move a deal forward. Lack of consumption in your program can be indicative of what I would say is a trust deficit, right? Conversely, a solid take rate of your competitive assets can be a great measure of the level of trust that you do have with your sales teams. Further, when you drive quality and consistency over quantity, the content is going to be more appreciated and better utilized. More is not better. Concise competitive assets that are going to help them close the deal are going to be far more appreciated than voluminous PDFs with aged content that mirror product data sheets. That's just not what we need in the competitive asset today. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time on what it takes to develop impactful content today, and ensuring that each asset that you drive has value to the sales teams. And that's going to be one of your key goals. Again, driving that sales trust. That brings me to my next point. Ensure that you're asking the right people for the right contact. Propeller heads they're not exactly known for their command of the English language and expressing tangible outcomes. If you're asking for specific competitive elements from various content creators, ensure that you're asking the correct level of detail from each of those people. Each person has their own skill sets. I'm not going to recommend that you find the person in the closet with a soldering iron and ask them to draft a frequently asked questions document about use cases, right? One area that I would really remind you, it's the more complex the assets are, the more authors you may want to consider leveraging. Yoke the strengths of your team to develop the best combined competitive assets rather than hoping that a person can create what you're needing, leveraging just their experiences. So keep those things in mind as you determine the overall resource needs and the investments required to deliver on an enterprise class program. I think the first step to building an enterprise competitive program is examining the foundation that you're building from. This might be controversial, but it is not starting with where your products are superior and deficient with your competitors. That kind of intelligence comes after you build the process for disseminating that information. Just for clarity, I spent several months at Juniper understanding what our current capabilities were, what the needs of the fields was, and evaluating different tools that I felt I would need to execute on the vision that I had for competitive enablement before I did anything content-wise. There's three key areas I want to focus on today: delivery, content, and curation. So we're going to start by looking at delivery. Asset consumption is one area you're going to need to stay on top of for several reasons, not the least of which is the metrics that you need to drive the program to success will come from that, right? Key considerations around consumption include the existing assets and how they're leveraged by your teams and the format that's used to create those various assets. If your current competitive assets don't leverage similar templates, try to understand why. I'm sure there's probably a solid reason in someone's mind that various templates can be used. But the reality is a more consistent and common framework is going to increase not only the adoption by your sellers, but it's going to alleviate some pressures on your content creators as they strive to meet the needs of your varied sales force. Platforms, learning management systems. These are key and critical to what you're doing. They're going to be able to provide those metrics that you're looking for as it pertains to the consumption of your assets, and they can sometimes consolidate feedback from the teams. As you're considering the platforms available, try to understand the existing sales enablement plan, what they're using for a document management system, and what other tools are being used to house digital assets today. Don't come to the table with a bunch of tools that you want to stack on top of what they're doing, but rather try to understand where and how you can get your assets into the existing tools that the sellers are successfully leveraging so that it's easier to find the content that you're creating. And then partner with other areas of the business that focus on upscaling the sales teams. Next would be content. And as I mentioned, templates are very important. Understanding what the field needs and using that knowledge to build templates for your content creators is very important. When we were building the templates at Juniper, I interviewed account managers, sales engineers, and a host of other people to better understand what they felt was required. Prior to that conversation, we had wildly different deliverables based on whatever that particular asset creator's assumptions were. And the reality is, you may think a seller needs something and they don't. And I saw some comments in previous sessions where they said just because they want it doesn't mean they need it. And that's absolutely true. But I would say if you try to manage by agreement and consensus, and you get enough input from enough of your sellers, it can help you hone what that list of content and assets is that you're developing and managing. So you're making sure you're getting the most out of the resources that you have. Lifecycle management is another big area to focus on. I work at Juniper. We're in the high-tech industry. I can't tell you how nerve-wracking it is to know that a single software release from one of our competitors can immediately render everything that I've worked on obsolete, right? If everything is in software today, if they release a new major software version and it closes the gaps on 16 or 17 weaknesses we've called out, that's something we've got to be able to quickly and easily react to, and we've got to have the systems in place to be able to meet those needs once they arise, and they will arise. That's just the nature of the business. Having a plan to ensure that your assets stay fresh is critically important. Full stop. Period. End of story. Now, what am I saying here about organization-wide versus business unit messaging? Well, enterprises are different than small companies, right? They often have multiple departments or business units with independent profit and loss statements. Those teams are focused on selling their product and their solutions. They can easily lose sight of the greater corporate sales messaging and the better together themes that our sales executives might prefer. Remaining aware of all of those different aspects as you're building your program is going to be important when you're developing content. You want to make sure that you're representing the whole organization and not just focusing in on a single business unit's product because it's new and it's the new shiny object in the room. Crafting the correct message to suit your wider organization's needs is going to be very important. And then finally, curation. So speak with the various product teams and understand what their current workload is. Is competitive intelligence a priority for them? That was a hard lesson for me. I just initially expected that, well, they're developing it. They know who our competitors are and they know why they created it. Well, while that was true, they didn't necessarily put time in their diary to make things for me because they already knew those things, right? It's going to be very important to judge not only the workload of your team, but the teams that you're going to be partnering with to make sure that you can have the right level of priority for that content. How well can your team balance the content needs? It's entirely possible that as you're developing the strategy, you're going to uncover the need to hire additional headcount. And that headcount may work for you. You might be asking other parts of the business to make investments in their headcount. But it's something you need to fully understand as you're building the strategy. You don't want to build the Taj Mahal and find out that you've only got the budget for an apartment. And we do live in a resource-constrained world. I can almost guarantee that no one on this call has a team of people sitting idly by, twiddling their thumbs, looking for something to do. In many cases, you're going to be asking very busy people to create or contribute to something for you. If you hope to be successful, the team members that you're asking to create content are going to be more apt to do so if they believe that the effort they're expending is going to make a difference and is going to be regularly referenced. So to that end, one guiding principle I would give you is develop content with purpose, which is what we're going to spend a few minutes on in this next section. First, let's take a couple of look at a couple of items that you want to consider as you develop this overall deal. Number one, I would suggest starting with who the intended audience is for the content. Do you need customer-facing assets? If you're developing customer-facing competitive assets, are you coming at it from an offensive or a defensive position? I think that the best approach to customer-facing competitive assets is something many of you would recognize as marketing, and you want to stay in your swim lane. But if you do feel the need to develop more targeted assets to alleviate the pressure from a certain market peer that is customer-facing, make sure you're doing it in partnership with those marketing teams and legal. If you have a partner program, should there be specific assets developed to help those partners win deals against the competition? Should partner-specific content have less detail than your internal assets? As it pertains to internal sellers, should you consider roles? The reality is your sales engineers require very different competitive data than your account managers. Customer success teams need different detail than service managers. The conversations happen at various levels, and it's very likely that the teams need to be equipped differently, which means that you may need multiple templates. You may need templates specific to your account managers, to your systems engineers, to your post-sales resources, to your customer service managers. You are going to have to consider what their needs are, so you're making content that's going to hit the mark. If you're sharing competitive intelligence with partners, does your non-disclosure agreement cover this kind of collateral? If it doesn't, clear your calendar. You're going to spend a lot of time with legal getting that approved, right? So those are things you're going to have to consider. And speaking of legal, what are the legal implications of sharing competitive intelligence with customers? These are all things that you're going to have to ferret out as you build the program. So we talked about who you should create the content for. Well, you should at least also understand what they've been tasked with selling. Our teams only have so much time, and we need to ensure that the balance of competitive content fits in the overall company enablement plan as well. We need to be efficient in what it is that we're delivering to them and leverage a just-in-time model whenever possible and fold into existing training efforts. There's going to be a lot of competing priorities. Depending on the structure of your sales teams, you don't know, are all of your sellers focused in one technology area? Maybe they're incentivized to sell recurring revenue over independent projects. Software could be a key business driver. The point is, you have to make sure that you're developing content that not only meets the business's goals, but your seller's goals. You need to keep their attention. Salespeople are coin operated, and they take many different coins. They take maintenance coins, they take software coins, they take recurring revenue coins, product coins, and newsflash, some of these coins are bigger than the others. What I mean by that is, if there's a 30% uplift on attaching maintenance to every product deal, you better believe they're going to want to do that so they can retire more quota. So you've got to truly understand not only the business and what your products are, but you have to understand the incentive structure that the sellers have when they're out there selling it, so that you're targeting the content for the way that they have been tasked to work. I think another way to kind of settle this here is a car salesman might have different needs depending on who he or she works for. A Ford salesperson needs to completely understand the competing products from Chevrolet, Toyota, Nissan, BMW, and a host of other manufacturers. Whereas a used car salesperson, they aren't necessarily focused as much on why one brand is better than another, but rather why their dealership should win the business of that particular customer. And finally, even recurring revenue can come into play depending on the business model that that dealership has selected. Once you know what your sellers are tasked with selling, you can start to build your competitive program. And I know it's a busy slide, and I vomited all over it. But the reality is, the key takeaway here is understand that you're aiming your content at the target your sales teams are trying to hit. So we talked about who. The next logical question is what. What does the field need? And battle cards are kind of a staple, and I giggle when I hear that, because let's face it, our salespeople, they're not suiting up in armor and attacking the competition. But the reality is, a properly structured asset does better equip them to respond to a customer's questions, and in many cases can help the seller raise doubt in a competitive deal if that's the step that they need to take. We'll spend more time specifically on battle cards in the next slide, but for now, let's look at other competitive assets you might want to consider in your program. Market data, independent analyst data. These can all be very powerful tools to convince a customer that your company is better positioned to lead them into the future. Demonstrations are often a key tool in the fight against your market peers. Frequently asked questions, while often in the realm of the marketing teams, can also be successfully leveraged for competitive purposes. Announcement responses. What does that mean? Well, often you may find out about something the same time your customers do. When your peer in the market issues a press release talking about the new whiz bang that they have, well, you need to be able to act on that and provide a structured response that helps your sellers properly respond when a customer asks questions about it. And in some cases, you may choose to integrate some conversation starters that can help preempt that conversation before the competition gets a chance to have that conversation with your joint customer. There's the customer case studies are always something that you can certainly leverage. And there's a host of other items. You can feel free to put them in the chat if you think that they should be in there. I'm not saying that there's any right or wrong answers, but what I do want you to understand is that each asset that you choose to include in the overall effort will require resources, and that may have an impact on the accuracy of the entire portfolio. Try to think of a resource cost that each asset will have as you develop your strategy. I can't stress enough the importance of the trust in the field. Back to slide 4, right? I work in the technology space. A single software release could render a competitive asset obsolete. If one of my sellers is reading a battle card that I'm calling that we've called out a specific weakness by one of our peers in the market with a feature that's missing, and that in a new software release comes out the day after they read it, and it is no longer a gap because that feature is now included in that competitor's product, they're going to go to the customer and they're going to lose faith in you because they've lost faith, that their customers lost faith in them because they may have brought up the fact that the partner or the competitor can't do this, but they in fact can. So you don't want to erode that trust that you have. So you've got to focus as much as you can on accuracy and honesty. Those are also going to come into play with new product introductions. Even as your team develops and innovates and creates new products, you've got to have the bandwidth to be able to iterate and modify your competitive assets to reflect not only what your competitors are doing, but what your teams are doing. Do the absolute best job you can to keep the trust that your sales team has in you. It'll erode very quickly. It could result in a water cooler conversation, shaking the entire field's trust in your program, depending on how things shake out. All right, so I did promise some time on battle cards, and I know we're not putting any armor on or grabbing a sword, but we will talk about that for a second. I would say, number one, templates again. Develop a template that is going to meet the needs of your sellers. Some of the items might be considered as that are on this slide. Number one, understanding a competitor's sales techniques. So what could that mean? That can be, you can come at that from your point of view or from the competitor's point of view. Maybe you've got some conversation starters, some trap setting, and some objection handling components inside that section of the battle card. Or maybe for the competitor, you're focusing on their propensity to demonstrate a particular feature, their known discounting structures, or a willingness to buy the business, to drive into the basement as far as pricing goes, or even to combat their go-to-market messaging. But those are just some things you may want to consider and include inside that portion of the battle card. I think the next one's a touchy subject. Product deficiencies and product strengths. Honesty and accuracy are key to keeping the sales force's trust. That means you've got to make sure and acknowledge when a competitor is better at you or at something that you are. Why do I say that? Well, we're at a competitive summit. There are 1,000 people registered for this event. One of my biggest competitors kicked this thing off this morning at 9 a.m. They have a competitive program. They're actively looking to see what Juniper's weaknesses are. If we don't acknowledge that our peers in the market are looking to expose our weaknesses and exploit them to our customers, we're fooling ourselves. So be honest. When we're beat, own it. And then determine how you're going to structure those conversations with your customers to mitigate that risk until you are in a position where you're beating that competitor in that area. Relevant differentiation. This one is near and dear to me because I'm always asking people to create content for me, and they're all busy. So sometimes it's easy to seize on something that's true, but not relevant. I'll give you an example. Maybe your organization manufactures televisions, and the television that you're currently selling uses a 32-watt power supply, and all of your peers in the market have 35-watt power supplies. Do you think it's really relevant to your customer that your power supply uses 3 less watts? Or is it more important that your display panel is 8K capable at a 4K price? You've got to make sure that your content curators are focusing on what our customers think is relevant, not which nerd knobs stand out, right? I think the next point here is battle cards are not training. They should be reinforcing assets. If you're pinning your competitive strategy on just building battle cards, you're doing your company a grave disservice. You should be incorporating your sales efforts and your enablement efforts into the overall enablement plan. So they're not just hearing about these competitive advantages when they read the battle card. It should be reinforcing and reminding them of content they've previously consumed as part of the wider corporate enablement plan. And lastly, SWOT analysis. I think that everyone should definitely remember that strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat is a key tenet to competitive, and make sure that it's in there in some way, shape, or form. And remind your content curators, again, it's not necessarily what the strengths and weaknesses of the competitor is. Maybe you can compare and contrast the strength and weaknesses of your organization as well. Because again, you've got to be honest and prepared to have the conversations when those weaknesses are uncovered by your peers in the market. All right, this one I saved for last. This is going to be the prickly subject, measuring success. We've got a few areas to delve into here. The first is the content that you're driving. You can certainly focus on ratings. You can look at feedback from the sellers. You can generally count on your LMS system providing feedback and ratings for your content to you. Even something as basic as a thumbs up, thumbs down is better than nothing. But really, you've got a lot of options here as far as making sure that your content is hitting the mark. Technology is a key and important part of the strategy, but so is the real interaction. I would recommend, in addition to leveraging the rating systems, that you also talk to the sales managers and individually talk to some of the sellers randomly to see what their feedback is and make sure that what you're doing is hitting the mark. When it comes to consumption, we've got several things we can measure, and each one has, you can have different meanings. I think initial views is something that's got a lot of power behind it, because low initial views on a product battle card can indicate that you selected the wrong competitor, or it might be that that particular product isn't as challenged in the market as we thought it was. Repeat or follow-up views can help you gauge the level of trust you have as far as the content's concerned. If people are regularly using the asset, you'll have the confidence that it's hitting the mark. Interaction with curators is a good metric as well to help you understand how the field is driving the accuracy of the program. And finally, sales management's perception of what your competitive program is doing is something I would also regularly check on. If you can get into quarterly or even bi-monthly meetings with those sales leaders and just, be a fly on the wall, see what they're saying, or ask pointed questions to understand how the content you're developing is helping the sales force. And now the hardest one of all, revenue impact. This is difficult. It's very difficult to quantify. That's why I saved it for last. It's kind of it's a conversation that goes nowhere. If you don't have valid data in your CRM and you're not tightly integrated with the other platforms you're using, you have no hope of showing revenue influence. There's no good way to do this besides hoping that the content that you printed made a difference to your customers, right? And so making sure that you're driving accuracy and data hygiene in that CRM so that when the right opportunity is selected and the competitor is selected, and then you can correlate that that seller did in fact use your content, that is something you can show as revenue that was influenced by the competitive program. Deals lost is almost easier to look at because you can see, all right, well, we've had 35 deals against a tier 2 competitor, but only 5% of our staff is using the assets. Well, now you've got a story to tell. Now you can start reaching out and evangelizing the content that you have because there's deals out there that could have been impacted by it. Conversely, if you lost a bunch of deals to a tier 2 competitor and 90% of the sellers that lost those deals used your content, well, now you've got an accuracy problem and you're very soon going to have a trust problem. All right, that's what I have today for you folks. I'm ready to take some questions, Erin.
Am I here? Hey, Chris, thanks so much. That was awesome. One thing that I just was the last slide when you're talking about measurement, I had never thought about sales management perception before. And I think it ties really nicely to the trust and motivations, or that coin kind of analogy you gave. Because if your sales managers don't believe in the content you're building, then they're not going to use those coins to support their sellers and build the trust there. So I love that one because I've seen so many different ways to measure competitive programs, but I haven't thought about perception of leaders. So kudos to you. So yeah, there are a lot of questions here. And thank you so much for sharing. There's lots of things in here that we want to dive into. So let's just dive into the questions. First one is, do you view CI content as something that is consumed by a rep in real time when they're on a call or with the prospect, or is it something that should be consumed or said before or after? What's your perception of that?
Yes. So ideally, they should be upskilling, spending a specific amount of time every day or every week getting up to speed on the competition and staying current. But also, it's not uncommon to have, there's integrations with Gong, with Klue as an example, where you can start to bring those competitive insights directly into a conversation as it's happening. So you can structure the program to do it in real time, but I would certainly recommend that you really weigh what you're doing towards the enablement side and trying to drive as much education as possible.
Yeah, and I think a follow-up question to that was, do you tailor the content differently then, depending on thinking of, is it going to be real time or before or after?
I would say yes.
Okay, cool. And do you incorporate sales strategy for each competitor or leave that up to the sales rep when you're building up?
Great question. Yeah, so right now what we're focused on is driving countering sales messaging. And so if our peers in the market are going to market with, artificial intelligence is where it's at, we're the best at artificial intelligence. Well, we want to make sure that they understand that Juniper was actually first in that market. We're very good. We've got this tool called Marvis. It does an awful lot of stuff. So it's making sure that you're truly understanding what the go-to-market message is, and then what your company's response to that is, or your rebuttal, if you will. I'm not exactly into trying to retrain the sellers on how to think on the fly about different sales messaging as much as we are trying to drive a consistent message from the company as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Right, that makes sense. Awesome. We have another question from Lindsay. I'm going to butcher last name. Bakowski, I think. Thanks, Lindsay, for the question. Let's say a competitor introduces a new product or feature. How do CI teams gain intel to that? And is that through a press release or competitor's website, or is there a better method of finding that intel?
That's a really good question. Press releases are really where a lot of it's coming from. Sometimes your partners will leak some information to you. Your sellers are going to hear things from the customers, and you've got the reality that It's just you're going to see it maybe in a trade magazine or something along those lines. We do live in a society where industrial espionage is illegal, so you don't necessarily see a lot of early spying happening. So but I think what I want to stress there is make sure you're aware that it can happen and have enough bandwidth in reserve to be able to call an all hands and get that new messaging or that new product analyzed and get a response out as quickly as you can.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, taking your feedback there, it sounds like it could, Lindsay, it could come from multiple areas, it sounds like, but definitely actioning on it and being prepared for them all to come in. That makes sense. And we also have another question from Victoria Spector. When it comes to external client-facing docs that sales reps can use with their prospects, how do you feel about using public sites to highlight comparisons such as G2 or Trust Radius?
It's going to come down to how much you trust what those public sites are going to provide, and do you want to extend your trust relationship outside of your realm of control? And it's going to come down to what your confidence is. If it's a site that you're familiar with and it's regularly providing solid data, then I think that's a good practice. But it's really difficult for me I work really hard to get the trust of my sales force. I really don't want to put myself in a position where someone else's work that's outside of my span of control can tear that down.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah, so those are the questions we have right now. I have another question myself, but if anyone else does have any other questions, feel free to pop it in the Q&A. We still have a couple minutes left. Or if you want to jump on the screen, please feel free to just click on the top right to share audio and video, and we can have you jump on the screen and ask the question live. But my question, Chris, that I was thinking on when you were going through the delivery content and curation kind of area earlier in the presentation, a lot of my clients, and I think even Klue sometimes, we struggle with deploying assets and keeping them up to date. And you mentioned that that's like a huge piece of trust. I mean, I'm a salesperson myself. I definitely want to be able to trust it. What are some strategies you've taken to ensure things are up to date and helpful?
Minimize how many copies there are, number one. And again, integrate into existing efforts. So if there are sales plays, if there are playbooks that are being built by members of your team, integrate into those things and have them reference your competitive content in the one place that you're storing it. So it's just easy to update and you don't have to chase all of these different copies of things. That's the death knell of the PDF, right? They end up everywhere and somebody's going to miss that one was posted on a SharePoint site somewhere. So what we do is really integrate all of our collateral in a comprehensive enablement plan, and nothing is ever duplicated.
Okay. No, that's awesome. I like that, and minimize the amount. I think will really help some people, even us at Klue, when we're using software, our own software. There is also a question about getting recordings and slides, and I believe, Chris, that we will be sharing that after. That was an anonymous question, but just keep your eyes out in email for those recordings. And if you don't receive them, you can always just email info@Klue, or even just myself, Erin at Klue, and I'm more than happy to get that recording that you would like. And then last question, and this one was kind of a fun one that we got in the event chat while you were presenting, and it said, speaking of cars, what kind of racer are you building back there? It looks sweet.
Yeah.
Any Jake said that, so I was curious. I could not ask.
Yeah, that's an off-road side-by-side. It's something that we had custom built for my wife and I to go explore the woods. I don't race it, but I do enjoy being out in the woods with it. And I do see a question about change management. How difficult has that been?
Oh, yeah.
I'm a change agent. I embrace change, so it's never really been a challenge for me. But getting other people to embrace that is always going to be a challenge. I think that if you can quickly and easily convince the content curators that if you just follow my plan, there's less work for you overall, it's going to go a long way. When I was selling the investment in Klue internally at Juniper, one of the key things that the content curators appreciated was it was a spot that they were going to have to go to update anything competitive. That is huge. And also because now I'm no longer tied to PDFs and I am instead leveraging a dynamic platform. And we do have multiple resources responsible for each battle card. It's not, we don't have a battle card where a single person wrote it. There's going to be 3 to 5 different authors on every asset we have. And now that this individually editable, I guess, those cards are uniquely theirs, they can quickly go in and modify them and confidently know that as soon as they do it, all the old stuff is gone. Nobody's going to see it again because it's immediate.
It looks like we are at time, but maybe we'll do this one last question and then we'll wrap things up for the day, if that's okay with you, Chris.
Sure.
Ashley Stark asked, how do you tackle competitive enablement when you're a newish industry with smaller competitors? It's easy to perform competitive enablement and research at Salesforce or Klue, but how can smaller companies get the same results?
That's a really good question. I think it starts with the Salesforce and understanding what they're hearing. So getting a good solid cadence between your sellers and making sure that they trust when they come to you and say, geez, Chris, I just talked to customer XYZ and a new competitor we didn't even know about was just in there trying to sell them this. And here's what I found out. You've got to be able to compile that information and then do your own research, but you're going to need to yoke the sales teams as that source of content. And so that you know where to direct your energies, especially as a small company, you're probably a one-person army. It's very difficult to be effective if you're not very particular about where you're focusing your energy.
Awesome. Well, everyone, it looks like we are at time. And really, Chris, thank you so much on behalf of Klue and the entire marketing team for this incredible content today. As discussed, we will collect all of this content and be delivering it back out to the viewers from today and from the summit. But we just really appreciate your time and expertise. And personally, I've always just loved working with you. So it's been a pleasure. And to everyone else who's joining, that does conclude today's sessions. So thanks for being so lively and engaging. And we're really excited for you to join tomorrow's sessions. We're going to be opening back up at 8:30 Pacific tomorrow. So we would love for you to participate again. And have a wonderful evening, lunch, dinner, whatever time it is, wherever you are. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.